Roblox has been around for nearly 20 years, and in that time it built up something no other gaming platform really has, its own mythology. Stories that spread from player to player, game to game, until nobody could remember where they started or whether any of it was actually real. Some of these myths terrified an entire generation of kids. Some turned out to be partially true, and some were so well crafted that even adults believed them. Today, we're going through every major Roblox myth and explaining exactly what happened, what was real, and what was just a very good lie. Guess 666. If you played Roblox before 2017, you already know about Guess. Guess were anonymous players who could join any game without an account, shown as a default gray character with no name. Just the word guessed, followed by a random number. They couldn't chat, couldn't interact much, and most of the time they just wandered around doing nothing. For the most part, guests were harmless, but then came the myth of Guest 666. Players started claiming that a specific guest, numbered 666, was different from all the others. Unlike regular guests, this one reportedly followed players around the map, stood perfectly still staring at them, and would vanish the moment you got close. Some players said Guest 666 showed up in private servers that were supposed to be locked. Others claimed their game started glitching out the moment it appeared. Walls turning dark, music distorting, their character freezing up for no reason. Videos spread everywhere. Kids were making compilation clips of supposed Guest 666 encounters, showing strange movements, eerie moments, and unexplained behavior. The myth grew fast, and the theory behind it grew with it. Players started saying Guest 666 wasn't just a creepy player, it was a corrupted entity living inside Roblox's code. Something that didn't belong there, something that Roblox themselves either couldn't remove or didn't know about. The truth is that every single one of those videos was staged. People used alternate accounts or manipulated footage to fake the encounters. The glitches blamed on Guest 666 were just regular Roblox bugs, which happened all the time in those years. And the number 666 was never actually assigned to a real guest in the way the myth described. It was a number players latched onto because of its obvious association with something dark. Roblox removed the guest feature entirely in October 2017. They said it was because guests were being used to bypass bans and troll games without any consequences, which was completely true. But the timing of that removal, right when the Guest 666 myth was at its peak, made a lot of players convinced that Roblox was covering something up. They weren't, but the legend never really died. Doe and Jane Doe. This is probably the most famous Roblox myth ever made, and it caused a level of panic that most people who weren't there for it would find hard to believe. Doe and Jane Doe are two accounts that have existed on Roblox since June 25th, 2005, before the game was even publicly available to play. Their account numbers are 2 and 3, which makes them among the very first accounts ever created on the entire platform. Both accounts have 0 friends, 0 game history, and have never been publicly active. They just sit there. 2 accounts from before Roblox existed, completely frozen in time. In early 2017, a rumor began spreading that Doe and Jane Doe were going to come online on March 18, 2017, and start hacking every Roblox account they could find. The story claimed these weren't just dormant accounts, they were sleeper programs planted inside Roblox's servers years ago, and March 18th was their activation date. Players were told that once they went active, they would start deleting items, draining Robux, and getting innocent players permanently banned. The panic was enormous. Kids were logging off Roblox entirely on that date. Parents were being pulled into it. Videos warning players to stay offline on March 18th were getting millions of views. It became one of the biggest moments of mass hysteria the Roblox community had ever seen. Then March 18th came, and Doe showed as online. For a brief window that day, Doe's account status showed as active. That sent the community into a complete meltdown. But Roblox quickly explained what happened. They had logged into the account themselves to address the situation and monitor how the rumors were spreading. It wasn't an activation, it was a Roblox employee. Roblox released an official statement shortly after confirming that Doe and Jane Doe are test accounts, created by the development team in the earliest days of the platform to test features before launch. They have never posed any threat to anyone and never will. The March 18th date was completely made up, but knowing the truth didn't stop the myth from living on. To this day, There are players who still bring up John Doe like the threat is real. One by one, by one, by one. If John Doe is the most famous myth, one by one, by one by one is the most complex one. This myth doesn't just have a story, it has lore, an entire constructed history that grew so large and so detailed that even people who knew parts of it were often wrong about which parts were real. The myth of one by one, by one by one centers around a Roblox account of the same name that supposedly belonged to a hacker who had been operating on the platform since its early years. According to the legend, this account didn't just hack games, it specifically targeted players, corrupted servers from the inside, caused game-wide glitches, and seemed impossible to ban or remove. Some versions of the story claimed one by one, by one by one was actually an artificial intelligence that Roblox built to test their own security systems, which eventually turned rogue and started acting on its own will. The account is real, it exists, but almost nothing else about the myth is. Here's where it gets interesting. A Roblox administrator named Telemon, who later became a senior figure at the company, wrote a fictional story about one by one, by one by one on the Roblox forums years ago. It was written as a story, creative fiction, not a factual report, but players discovered it, ripped it out of context, and started treating it as official documentation of what one by one, by one by one actually was. The line between the fan myth and the official fiction blurred completely, and most players had no idea they were reading a story someone made up for fun. The real account was either a test account or an old dormant user from the earliest days of the platform. There is no credible evidence it ever hacked anyone. The glitches and server corruptions attributed to it were standard early Roblox instability. The game ran terribly in its early years, and bugs happened constantly. What one by one by one by one turned into is genuinely interesting, though. It became Roblox's version of a folk legend. There are full games, fan films, and YouTube series built entirely around it. At some point, it stopped being a myth and became a character. And that character has outlasted almost everything else from that era of the platform. The Stalker. Around 2017 and 2018, a myth started circulating that hit differently from the others because it wasn't dressed up as supernatural. It was framed as a real warning, something parents and kids needed to know about. The story claimed that a specific player, referred to as the Stalker, was using Roblox to gather personal information from children. Not in-game information, real information, names, schools, locations. The myth said this person would engage young players in friendly conversation, get them to share small details without realizing it, and then piece those details together to figure out who they were in real life. Screenshots of supposed conversations circulated online, showing a player feeding back personal information to a child who had no idea how it was collected. The story spread fast, and a lot of it was shared by adults who genuinely believed they were protecting kids. It reached parents who had never played Roblox and gave them a specific villain to be afraid of. There was no singular stalker. The specific account and the specific story were fabricated. No single person was doing all of what the myth described, and the evidence screenshots were never verified. But here's where this myth is different from every other one on this list. The behavior it described, adults using children's games to collect personal information from young players, is a real and documented problem that exists across every major online platform. Roblox specifically has faced genuine criticism over the years for how slowly it responded to predatory behavior in its chat systems, and how long it took to implement proper safety tools for younger users. So the villain was invented, but the fear behind the story was pointing at something real. That is why it spread so quickly, and why even now, years later, it still gets shared as a warning, usually by people who have no idea it started as a myth. The April 1st hacker. This myth built itself around something players could actually observe happening, and that is what made it so convincing. Starting around 2012, players noticed that Roblox seemed to go down every single year on April 1st. Not just occasional maintenance, but full extended outages on the same date, year after year. Players started connecting the dots and landed on what seemed like an obvious explanation. A hacker was doing it on purpose. Someone out there had a grudge against Roblox and was taking the entire platform offline every April Fool's Day as an annual statement. The myth named this person different things over the years, but the story was always the same. One elite hacker, one personal vendetta, one day a year where they proved they could do whatever they wanted. The real explanation is far less dramatic. April 1st is one of the highest traffic days on Roblox every single year. Developers flood the platform with special prank games and events. Players come back specifically for April Fool's content, and the entire community spikes in activity all at once. The servers simply buckled under the load. Every outage on that date was a capacity problem, not an attack. Roblox has been the target of real DDoS attacks at various points in its history. That part is true, but there was no single figure scheduling annual takedowns as a tradition. The pattern players saw was real. The reason they invented for it was not. The Robux Scam. This one spread through the community as more of a warning than a ghost story, but it grew large enough to become its own myth entirely. The claim was that certain sellers online were offering Roblox accounts loaded with rare, limited items and large amounts of Robux at prices that seemed too good to be real. Players who bought them said the accounts worked fine at first, but then days or weeks later, the original owner would reclaim the account through Roblox support, taking everything with them and leaving the buyer with nothing. The buyer was out there real money and had no recourse because they had purchased a stolen account. Beyond just the scam itself, the myth grew a second layer. Players started saying that some of these sellers were actually running an organized operation, systematically hacking accounts, stripping the valuable items, selling the access, then clawing the accounts back through support tickets using the original owner's information. A coordinated recycling scheme running entirely in the open. This one is largely true. Account scamming of exactly this type has been widely documented across Roblox's history, and the pattern of selling compromised accounts and then recovering them through official support is a real tactic that real people used. Roblox's limited item economy made it particularly attractive because rare items held significant real-world value. The organized criminal network version of the myth was exaggerated, but the core of it, people losing real money buying hacked accounts that got taken back, happened to a significant number of players and is one of the few myths on this list that was more true than false. The erased games. For years, players have noticed that certain games on Roblox disappear overnight with no explanation. Not games that were obviously breaking rules. Those removals make sense. But games with large active communities and nothing visibly wrong with them, gone without warning, with no announcement from Roblox about why. The myth around this grew into something bigger. Players started claiming that Roblox was specifically targeting games that got too close to certain topics. Games that recreated controversial moments in Roblox history, games that exposed internal drama, games that somehow contained information Roblox didn't want public. The theory was that there was an invisible line, and crossing it didn't just get your game flagged, it got it silently erased. This one is genuinely hard to fact-check because deleted games leave almost no trace. What is verifiable is that Roblox has removed games without clear explanation multiple times, and developers who built those games were often given vague or no reasoning for why it happened. Some of those removals were clearly justified by TOS violations that weren't always obvious from the outside. Others have never been satisfactorily explained. Whether any of those games contain genuinely sensitive information about Roblox as a company, that part is unknown. The deletions are real and documented. What was in those specific games and exactly why they were removed has never been fully answered in most cases. This is the one myth on this list that does not have a clean verdict. Some of those games are simply gone, and the explanations provided were never enough to fully close the case. The Fake Noob. The last myth on this list is the one that turned out to be true, and it is one most people never even thought of as a myth. For as long as Roblox has existed, the default avatar, the basic blocky character with no customization, usually yellow, has been called a noob, and for just as long it has been assumed that anyone still wearing that default look was either brand new to the game or simply someone who didn't care enough to change their appearance. New player, no experience, easy to beat. That was the assumption baked into the entire culture of Roblox for years. The myth, or rather, the counter-story, claimed that the most dangerous players on the platform deliberately kept the default look. Veterans with thousands of hours who knew exactly what they were doing, playing in games dressed like beginners so nobody would take them seriously. The story said these players would walk into competitive games looking completely harmless, get underestimated, and then take apart everyone in the lobby without breaking a sweat. This is documented behavior. It happens across almost every competitive game, experienced players using new or default-looking accounts to avoid being targeted or to catch opponents off guard. In Roblox specifically, multiple well-known players have openly admitted to doing exactly this. The default avatar became a genuine psychological tool for players who understood how heavily appearances influenced how others played against them. So the noob myth is not a myth at all, it is a strategy. And if you have ever been destroyed by someone in a default avatar and convinced yourself they just got lucky, they probably did not get lucky. Every single myth on this list started the same way. Someone saw something strange or heard something unsettling and told another player. That player told someone else, and the story kept moving until it had a life completely separate from whatever started it. Most of these myths were false. A couple were more real than people realized, and one was never explained at all, but that is what makes Roblox unlike almost anything else in gaming. It is old enough and big enough to have its own folklore, its own legends, its own ghost stories passed down from one generation of players to the next. And somewhere out there right now, a new one is probably starting.